A champion vanishes. It was a gray, damp morning when Sherlock Holmes received a telegram that would take us deep into the heart of Dartmoor, into a case that, at first glance, seemed to be about a missing horse, but quickly galloped into something far more sinister. Holmes handed me the message across the breakfast table at 221 B. Baker Street. Come at once, if convenient. If inconvenient, come all the same. Gregory. I recognized the name, Inspector Gregory of Scotland Yard, calm, methodical, and not one to waste time on trivial matters. The disappearance of a racehorse, Holmes explained, sipping his coffee, and the death of a man. Both from King's Pyland, the estate of Colonel Ross. The horse in question is Silver Blaze, the favorite for the Wessex Cup. Quite the scandal in the sporting world. I raised an eyebrow. And the man, John Straker, the horse's trainer, found dead on the moor with a head wound. It seems the horse vanished on the same night. Holmes stood, already reaching for his coat. The stakes are higher than gambling slips, Watson. The pride of English racing is missing, and a good man is dead. We arrived in Dartmoor that evening, the wind sweeping low across the bleak, rolling moorland. Colonel Ross greeted us with a mixture of relief and impatience. I trust you know the value of what has been lost, Mr. Holmes. Silver Blaze is not only worth thousands, he's a legend. Holmes nodded, and legends attract enemies. Ross led us to the stable, now dark and still. The other horses stamped nervously in their stalls. Silver Blaze's stall stood ominously empty. No signs of forced entry, Ross said. But the stable boy, Ned Hunter, was drugged. Opiate in his supper. Holmes examined the stall door, then the surrounding yard. And Straker? Dead, just beyond the moor's edge. We found him the next morning. I asked, was anything taken besides the horse? Ross hesitated. Only Straker's walking stick. His body was found beside it. Holmes was silent for a moment, then said softly, "A man dies, a horse vanishes, and a boy sleeps through it all. Curious, very curious." And in that quiet moment, I saw it begin. The subtle shift in Holmes's gaze, the click of thought beginning its gallop toward the truth. The murder of Straker. The morning after our arrival, Holmes, Watson, and Inspector Gregory journeyed across the windswept moor to the site where John Straker's body had been discovered. The air was sharp with mist, and the ground beneath our feet soft with dew and hidden stones. Straker's corpse had been removed, but the scene remained untouched, at Holmes's request. A low ridge shielded the hollow where the body had lain. Holmes paced slowly, eyes fixed on the turf, pausing at intervals to crouch, examine, and silently commit each detail to memory. Here, Gregory pointed, we found him lying on his back, skull fractured. This, he held up a blood-stained walking stick, was beside him. His own. Oak. Heavy. Holmes took it and tested the weight in his hand. Quite capable of inflicting a fatal wound, he murmured. Watson bent down. What's this? He indicated a scattering of faint marks in the soil. Holmes followed his gaze. Yes, hoofprints. Not many, and curiously erratic. He rose and surveyed the horizon. No signs of a struggle, he asked. None, said Gregory, and no other footprints. Odd, isn't it? Very, Holmes said. Especially considering that Straker was not merely killed, he was murdered in silence, on open ground. We visited the body next, laid out in a nearby outhouse. Straker's face bore a frozen expression, more shock than pain. Holmes examined the head wound carefully, then turned his attention to the man's clothing. Gently, he pulled back the coat, and frowned. A small knife, he said, extracting it from an inner pocket. Delicate, curved, certainly not for defense. Watson took it. Surgical, or used for precision work. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Interesting. He then examined Straker's boots and trouser cuffs. A smear of wax, a fleck of ash, a torn thread. Everything tells a story, he muttered. Gregory added, Straker's wife claims he was restless that week, worried. She thought it was the pressure of the race. Holmes smiled faintly. No, Inspector, he was not anxious for the horse. He was anxious for himself. He turned away, lost in thought. As we walked back toward the stables, Holmes spoke quietly. A murdered man with a surgical blade. A drugged stable boy. A vanished champion. The pieces are scattered, Watson, but the outline is forming. I asked, and the motive? He gave me a look. Motives are easy. Means, now, that is the art. Holmes accepts the case. After examining the moor and Straker's body, we returned to the stables. Holmes, ever silent in thought, moved through the yard as if following unseen threads. He inspected the fence lines, the stable doors, even the feed bins. Inspector Gregory trailed behind, notebook in hand. Tell me, Mr. Holmes, he saw, do you think this is the work of some racing rival? Perhaps someone hired to remove Silver Blaze from the field? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the latch on Silver Blaze's stall, well-oiled, recently cleaned. Inspector, Holmes said at last, have you considered that the horse may not have been stolen? Gregory blinked. But he's missing. Yes, Holmes said, but perhaps not stolen, perhaps led away. He moved to examine the adjacent stalls. The other horses seemed restless, particularly a dappled gray gelding that stamped nervously as Holmes drew near. He studied the animal's legs. Fresh mud, a small nick just above the hoof. Curious. He turned to the stable hand, a lanky youth named Talbot. Who handled this horse yesterday? Straker, sir, Talbot replied. He was the only one who exercised the racers. Even at night? Talbot hesitated. Sometimes, when he didn't want attention. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he turned back to Gregory. Let us walk the perimeter of the paddocks. As we did, Holmes questioned the guard rotations, feed deliveries, and even the habits of the yard dog. Nothing escaped his scrutiny. Then, as we paused near the eastern fence, he pointed at the turf. A trail, slight but visible, hoof impressions, and a man's boot, no sign of return, this way. We followed the line of impressions as they veered into the moor, the same path leading to where Straker's body had been found. But why would he lead the horse out alone? I asked. Holmes answered without looking back. Because he didn't intend to return with it. We stopped near a cluster of bushes. Holmes crouched and retrieved something from the ground, a torn piece of cloth, silk and dark red. From a coat, he said, possibly Straker's, torn in a hurry. Gregory frowned. Straker was trying to take the horse? Holmes stood. He was planning something, but the horse resisted. There was a struggle. Then death. We returned to the house, and Holmes finally declared, Inspector, I am now ready to accept responsibility for this case, but I warn you, nothing is as it seems. Tracks in the moor. With Gregory's blessing, Holmes and I rode to the nearby village of Tavistock, a quiet, weathered place whose inn, the Mapleton Arms, sat at the center like an old man watching time pass. Holmes believed that somewhere in this village lay a clue that had nothing to do with horses or murder, but everything to do with motive. We took rooms at the inn and began asking questions. Holmes's manner was casual, almost indifferent, yet I could see how closely he watched every expression, every hesitation. Anyone new in town? He asked the landlord. Not really, the man replied, except for a stranger 2 days ago, dark fellow. asked for directions to King's Pyland. Didn't say his name. Holmes said. And did he return? No, left that same night, didn't even finish his supper. Holmes thanked him, then we walked into the market square. There, he stopped before a small milliner's shop. The sign above read, J. Straker, Company Ladies Dress and Trim. A tailor? I asked. No, Holmes said, a customer. He entered and spoke with the shopkeeper, a wiry woman with pins in her cuff. Have you recently filled an order for Mrs. Straker? Indeed, she said. A fine piece of silk. Beige with maroon trim. Very expensive. Holmes nodded. And did she come to collect it? The woman hesitated. No, her husband did. Her husband? Yes, said it was a gift. Strange choice of fabric for a man, I thought. Holmes thanked her and we left. In the street he smiled. And now we have it. Have what? I asked. A motive. And a mask. Holmes explained as we walked. Straker was not leading Silver Blaze to be stolen. He was leading him to be injured, quietly, precisely. That small surgical blade was not for murder. It was for crippling. Enough to remove the horse from the race without suspicion. I stopped cold. But why? Because Straker had debts. And a woman, likely one unaware she was being dressed with her lover's wife's money. He intended to fix the race, to win big. And he died trying. Holmes nodded. Because even the cleverest plans collapse when you forget one thing. I asked, what's that? He smiled. That a champion doesn't stand still when threatened. And in that moment, I began to see it, how a man's private vice had led to a public tragedy. The curious behavior of the dog. Back at King's Pyland, Holmes requested a final walk around the stable yard alone, but after some minutes had passed, he called Watson and Inspector Gregory to join him. They found him standing beside the night guard's kennel, gently scratching behind the ears of the yard dog, a wiry collie with kind eyes and a silent mouth. This, Holmes said softly, is the most eloquent witness of all. Gregory frowned. The dog? It never made a sound the night of the crime. Precisely, Holmes replied. That is what makes him important. He didn't bark. We looked at him blankly. Consider, Holmes said. A stranger enters a stable at night. A horse vanishes. A man is killed. And yet the dog gives no alarm. Gregory hesitated. Because it was someone the dog knew? Holmes smiled. Exactly. The intruder was not an intruder at all. It was someone familiar, someone the dog had seen before, fed before, passed by without fear. That tells us everything. I began to grasp it. So, Straker himself led the horse out. Yes, Holmes said. Because if it had been anyone else, the dog would have raised the alarm. Gregory added, but that still leaves us with Straker's death. Holmes stood. Let's reconstruct. Straker drugs the stable boy, waits for nightfall, leads Silver Blaze into the moor. There, under cover of darkness, he intends to inflict an injury, just enough to remove the horse from the contention in the Wessex Cup. But the horse panics. Holmes nodded. Most likely. Straker misjudges. Perhaps he lights a candle, perhaps the blade reflects moonlight. Whatever it was, the animal rears, kicks, and strikes its attacker with a fatal blow. Gregory whispered, killed by his own scheme. Poetic, Holmes agreed, and entirely deserved. He turned to the yard dog. You did your job, old friend, just not the way they expected. Gregory looked thoughtful. We still need to find the horse. Holmes nodded. Yes, and I believe I know where to look. He turned back toward the stables. Come, gentlemen. The answer lies not in who disappeared, but in who reappeared unexpectedly. a cape and a candle. That evening, Holmes requested to revisit the moor, not with Gregory this time, but with me alone. The wind had picked up again, and the sky hung low with thick clouds. We moved silently across the darkened field, retracing the trail from Silver Blaze's stall to the site of Straker's death. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, "do you recall the small knife found in Straker's pocket?" "Yes," I replied. "A delicate blade, not one for self-defense." "Exactly, and yet, why carry it unless he expected to use it that night?" He stopped near the spot where the body had been found. Holmes scanned the brush and grass with his lantern. Then he crouched and retrieved something from beneath a clump of gorse. It was a half-burnt candle stub, set in a shallow tin holder. "A candle in the open moor," Holmes murmured, "shielded from the wind, just long enough to work." He rose. Straker needed light to injure the horse with precision. He couldn't do it blindly, but light betrays. I added, "Silver Blaze must have reared at the flash of it." "Precisely. And what happens when a racehorse strikes out with full force? The hoof lands squarely here." He pointed to the ridge of soft ground where the bloodstains had long since faded. "A simple accident?" I asked. "No," Holmes said. "A consequence." We returned to the inn. Holmes took out a racing catalogue and flipped through the entries for the Wessex Cup, scanning the names of horses and trainers. Suddenly he stopped. "Here," he said, "the stables of Silas Brown at Mapleton, a private yard unaffiliated with King's Pyland, and, most importantly, he has recently entered a new horse for the Wessex Cup, one no one has seen before." My eyes widened. "You believe Silver Blaze is being kept there?" Holmes closed the book. "No, I believe he's racing there under a different name." I stared. "But wouldn't Colonel Ross recognize his own horse?" Holmes gave a sly smile. "Not if the animal's markings were altered." He leaned back in his chair. "A splash of dye, a trimmed mane, nothing permanent, just enough to deceive until the race is won. And afterward," Holmes's eyes glinted, "we'll uncover the truth. But first let us visit Mr. Silas Brown and see how well he handles surprise." The milliner's bill. At first light, Holmes and I made our way to Mapleton Stables, home of Silas Brown, a private trainer with a hard reputation and harder face. The yard was modest but orderly. As we approached, a pair of stable hands gave us curious glances. Holmes walked straight to the main house and knocked firmly. A gruff man in shirt sleeves opened the door. His brow furrowed at the sight of us. "Mr. Brown?" Holmes asked. "Yes," the man replied cautiously. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. I believe you're stabling a horse that doesn't belong to you." The color drained from Brown's face. I don't know what you mean." Holmes stepped closer. "Let's not waste time. Silver Blaze was brought here, disguised, and entered in your name for the Wessex Cup. You dyed the white blaze on his forehead, trimmed the fetlocks, and gave him a new name, but his gait cannot lie." Brown stammered. "That's absurd. I'd never—" Holmes cut in. "I can prove it, but I prefer not to humiliate you publicly. Return the horse, quietly, now." Silas Brown hesitated, his jaw clenched, fists tightening. Holmes's voice dropped. "You didn't kill Straker, but you were complicit. A man brought you the horse claiming it was legitimate. When Straker failed to return, you panicked, hid the animal, changed its markings." Brown's shoulders slumped. I didn't know what else to do." Holmes nodded. "Then do what's right. Colonel Ross arrives in 2 days. Silver Blaze must be in his stall before he does, restored and unchanged." Brown muttered, "Yes, sir, it'll be done." As we left, I turned to Holmes. How did you know he'd confess so easily? Holmes smiled. Because guilt is not so heavy as the fear of discovery. Brown knew the lie wouldn't last through inspection. I merely hurried the process. That evening, Holmes sat at our inn, examining a small receipt he'd quietly retrieved from Straker's coat, one the inspector had overlooked. A milliner's bill, he said, for a costly dress, ordered in the name of a woman Straker was never married to. So the motive? Clear, Holmes replied. Straker had debts, a mistress, and a plan to fix the race, but he underestimated both the intelligence of the horse and the reach of his own deceit. A misdirected trail. The next day, with Silver Blaze safely returned to his stall under the cover of silence, Holmes revisited the scene not to chase new leads, but to solidify motive. As he often reminded me, understanding the why makes the how much clearer. We began at Straker's home. Mrs. Straker received us with polite grief, her composure brittle but not broken. She still believed her husband had died trying to protect the horse. Holmes asked to see his belongings. She led us to a modest study. Everything is as he left it, she said, then excused herself. Holmes moved swiftly, methodically. Within minutes he had laid out a Straker's ledger, grooming notes, betting slips, and correspondence. Then, from behind a stack of veterinary journals, he retrieved something unusual, a surgical textbook. "Watson," Holmes said, "look here, an entire chapter bookmarked. Operations on the tendon flexors of the horse's leg." I bent closer. He was researching how to maim, without laming permanently. Holmes nodded grimly. A precision injury, enough to delay Silver Blaze's race career, perhaps disqualify him for the season. But why such subtlety? Because overt damage would raise suspicion, but an unexplained strain, a training accident, much cleaner. Holmes then opened a drawer and removed a small envelope. Inside was a letter, heavily perfumed and signed only L. The writing was elegant, the words affectionate, and the tone possessive. "She writes as a woman who believes she's owed something," Holmes murmured. "A lover, perhaps more." I asked, "You think Straker was being blackmailed?" "No," Holmes said. "He was investing in a new life, one he couldn't afford unless he took drastic action." He packed the materials carefully. "Watson, this case was never about theft. It was about greed, vanity, and desperation. Straker played a long game, but he played it poorly." Back at the stables, Holmes spent several quiet minutes beside Silver Blaze, who now stood calm, proud, and utterly unaware of the conspiracy that had nearly ended him. As we turned to leave, Holmes said softly, "The cleverest schemes often collapse, not because of flaws in execution, but flaws in character." Straker's brilliance with horses blinded him to one simple truth: they don't betray, but men do. The real weapon. That evening, Holmes and I stood once more on the edge of Dartmoor. The sky had darkened with heavy clouds, and the wind pushed low across the grass like a restless spirit. Holmes held Straker's curved knife in one hand, studying its edge beneath the flicker of his lantern. "You see, Watson," he said, "this blade is the puzzle piece most people misread. It's small, sharp, and made not for defense, but for surgery, for precision. That tells us Straker did not expect a confrontation." He walked toward the spot where the body had been found and knelt by the earth. "Let's reconstruct it." He placed the knife carefully on the ground, then stood and mimicked holding a lid. Straker led the horse to this spot. He tied the reins to a bush, set up the candle, there, shielded by his coat. Then, with this blade, he prepared to make a small incision in the horse's leg. He assumed control. Holmes paused. "But horses are not wood. They're not passive, they sense intention. Silver Blaze was no ordinary gelding. He was a champion, and Straker underestimated that. He took a few steps back. Picture it. The cold metal touches skin, a glint of light. The animal rears in fear. One hoof lashes out, striking Straker full in the skull. He tapped his temple. Instant death. The ground confirms it. One body, no drag marks, no second attacker. I asked, then why did the constables not realize this sooner? Because the knife was still present, Holmes said. Its presence made them think murder. But in truth, Straker was both perpetrator and victim. He brought the weapon. He created the moment. And the horse delivered the consequence. I exhaled slowly. And the hoofprints? Scattered, wild, exactly what you'd expect after a panicked flight. He stood upright again. Watson, this is not a case of who done it. It's a case of what broke the trust between man and beast. He looked across the moor. Nature doesn't scheme, it reacts. Straker's betrayal of the horse was felt and answered. I asked, so no one killed him? Holmes turned to me. No man did. What the stable knew. The following day, Colonel Ross arrived, as punctual and proud as ever, expecting the worst. He was astonished to find Silver Blaze safe in his stall, well-fed, uninjured, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the last week. This is impossible, Ross said, stepping into the stall, staring at the horse as though expecting it to vanish. Where has he been? Who had him? Holmes replied calmly. At a private yard not far from here, the trainer, Silas Brown, was complicit, though likely misled. The horse has been returned, unmarked, just as promised. Ross turned sharply. And what of Straker? Dead, Holmes said, not by murder, but by miscalculation. He led Ross and me to the study, where he laid out all the evidence on a writing desk, the surgical knife, the half-burned candle, the milliner's receipt, and a photograph of Silver Blaze before his markings were altered. Holmes spoke evenly, without flourish, as he recounted the events. Straker had debts. He also had a mistress. He planned to win money betting against Silver Blaze, money that required the horse to be removed from the race without suspicion. His plan was elegant, in theory. Lead the horse out at night, use this blade, he tapped the knife, to inflict a small tendon injury, just enough to disqualify him. Ross listened, stunned. But Silver Blaze reacted. He sensed the threat, reared, and struck his handler with a fatal blow. In panic, the horse bolted. Holmes continued. He wandered onto Brown's property, where the man recognized him and saw opportunity. He altered the markings and prepared to race him under a false name, until I arrived. Ross muttered, incredible. Holmes added, there's more. This is not a tale of villains, but of pride. Straker believed he could outsmart both beast and system. He failed. Ross exhaled, looking at his prized horse. Then, I suppose, justice has already been served. Holmes nodded. By the most unexpected executioner of all, a creature of instinct and strength. He glanced at me. Watson, you've seen many criminals, but few punish themselves as swiftly as Straker did. The truth about Silver Blaze. The day of the Wessex Cup arrived beneath clear skies, drawing a massive crowd of spectators, bookmakers, and sporting men. Though Holmes and I arrived without fanfare, I sensed a quiet thrill in Holmes's demeanor. He wasn't here merely as a guest. He had come to watch the final act of a drama only he truly understood. Colonel Ross greeted us near the paddock, still skeptical. I don't suppose Silver Blaze can win after all he's been through. Holmes simply smiled. I think he may surprise you. The horses paraded past. All were fine animals, but there was no mistaking Silver Blaze. His signature stride now returned, his blaze restored after Holmes had seen to the cleaning of the altered die. The crowd, however, murmured in confusion. "That's not Silver Blaze," one man whispered. "Looks like, but can't be." "Why not?" asked another. "Because he vanished. They said he was dead." I leaned toward Holmes. "You never announced his return." "Why spoil the moment?" he replied. The race began. Silver Blaze burst from the gates like a thunderbolt. His legs moved with effortless power, the kind no disguise could mask. By the first furlong, he had seized the lead. By the final turn, he was uncatchable. When he crossed the finish line, it was by 4 full lengths. The crowd roared. Colonel Ross looked stunned. "That was him?" Holmes nodded. "Indeed, undamaged, undefeated, and unaware that he'd just won more than a trophy. He won justice." Ross turned to him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you wouldn't have believed it," Holmes said. "The horse vanished. You were sure someone took him. But in truth he escaped, wandered to another stable, and was nearly passed off as someone else's." As the cheers continued, Holmes and I slipped away to the edge of the grandstand. "There's a certain satisfaction," he murmured, "in watching the truth win at full gallop." I asked, "And Straker?" "His secrets died with him, but the lesson remains." Holmes turned toward the paddock. "Never underestimate nature, Watson, especially when it wears 4 shoes and carries no agenda but to run." The race and the revelation. Back at Baker Street, after the dust of the Wessex Cup had settled and Silver Blaze's name once again echoed through every sporting column in England, Holmes reclined in his armchair with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had watched truth outrun deception. I closed my notebook, having just completed the final lines of the case. "There is one part still lingering in my mind," I said. "One detail you never fully explained." Holmes looked up. "Ah, you mean the dog in the night-time?" "Exactly. It did nothing, and yet it mattered." Holmes smiled. "That, my dear Watson, was the turning point." He leaned forward. "Consider, the stable boy was drugged, the horse vanished, a man was killed, but the guard dog, on duty that night, did not bark. What does that tell you?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "That the intruder was known to the dog." "Precisely. It's the silence that condemned Straker. If a stranger had entered, the dog would have raised the alarm, but it remained quiet, because it saw no threat." Holmes continued. "So I asked myself, not who came in, but rather, who left with the horse unnoticed, and the only answer was, its own trainer." I nodded slowly. A single piece of absence revealed the entire plot. "Exactly," Holmes said. "A negative clue, often more powerful than a positive one." He rose and moved toward the window. "You see, Watson, it's not always the noise that points to guilt. Sometimes it's the very lack of disturbance that cries the loudest." I stood as well, closing the case file. 1 horse, 1 dead man, and a silent dog. That's all it took. Holmes turned with a faint smile. "And a little logic, my friend." As we prepared for the next case, I paused at the door. "There's something elegant about it," I said. "That a racehorse told the truth with his hooves, and a dog told it by doing nothing at all." Holmes chuckled softly. "In detective work, Watson, sometimes the loudest clue is the one that doesn't bark."